Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is me, Nadia Rajput from DTV NN. Let me take you to the special report. Houston Ethnic Media proudly presents an insightful and eye-opening experience through its ethnic media Toxic Buzz Tour in collaboration with Air Alliance Houston. The tour kicks off at Air Alliance Houston, located at 2520 Caroline Street, Houston, Texas 77004, starting at 11 a.m. from downtown Houston. At the heart of this initiative is Air Alliance Houston's unwavering commitment to a fundamental principle, the right of every individual to breathe clean air. Their mission revolves around minimizing public health impacts from air pollution through a multifaceted approach encompassing research, education, awareness, and advocacy.
Heat trapping gases are a type of pollution. They're not the only pollution. There are other types of pollution: smog, ozone, carcinogens. But it's a concerning type of pollution because what pollutes the air warms the climate. So we're also very concerned about where heat trapping gases come from. And this is really interesting, but not unlike other big cities, where you'll see almost half and half. The first top line is energy sector, so refineries, petrochemicals. The bottom line is transportation: cars, trucks, trains, ships, and planes, right? And they're practically the same. That's carbon emission in the Houston area. And that's actually very common for large cities. Why? Because we have a lot of cars. Right. Okay, so that was my third message. Here are the pollution sources. They're pretty much half and half, if you remember that, between industry and cars. Okay, next up. This was the map, sir, I was going to say was going to really pop out to you. This is message number 4. I'm going to go to message number 5 and then turn it over to Dr. Uwai. Message number 4. Environmental harms are not equal in Houston, just for the reasons we were talking about. This diagram shows you a phenomenon that those of us in environmental justice work call the Houston arrow. Have folks heard about this before? No? So what the Houston arrow is, it's just a visual. It's a visual reminder. When you map pretty much any vulnerability measure, poverty, education status, employment history, if you map any one of those socioeconomic measures, and or map race and ethnicity, and or map environmental sources. So all those TRIs, those 571 toxic release inventory sites I mentioned, you see this pattern. Will you turn that light off behind your head, do you mind? Can you see it a little better? It's called the Houston arrow. This is the arrow. There's an arrow, right? And what the Houston arrow is doing, it's doing either of these two things. It's either pointing you to the areas of harm, or it's showing you where there isn't any. And I'm sure you can guess what this is pointing to. So these are the census tracts in the Houston area that are black, brown, low income, and have environmental harms. These are the census tracts that are not. And virtually every measure you map in Houston will look like this. And that's why we now call it the Houston arrow. Here's another version of the Houston arrow. This is my last message, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Uwai. My last message is this.
But you've just given us a great headline.
Yes?
Houston arrow.
Yes. And I think I didn't put the Houston arrow source on here, but there is a website for the Houston arrow, which we can give to you as well. I gave you the original source. This map came from the Environmental Protection Agency. It's specifically about environmental justice. But the Houston Arrow website has versions of these maps that show you other metrics. But here's another version that I also want to show you too. It's a little harder to see this one. It's one of the reasons I turned the light off. This is life expectancy in Houston. So here's race, social vulnerability, and environmental harm. Here's life expectancy. And you see it pop out. It's a little harder, not quite as dramatic, but it's here. But I think what's really dramatic is when you see these darker census tracts. That's lower life expectancy. So these things track together. Environmental harms track to life expectancy. And in the Houston area, there is a 20-year difference between the lowest, right here, and the highest, which is somewhere in here. It's really small. It's like that one. Right? So,
Thank you.
back to the first message. Air pollution contributes to virtually every health issue. Houston has a significant air pollution problem. That problem is not distributed equitably in our communities, and as a result, environmental justice communities are sicker and dying sooner. And as a closer and a transition, that's why we were founded. So we have been here since the late 1980s to try to reverse all of those trends that I just shared with you. And you have materials in your folder about the work we do, the campaigns we work on. There will be staff on the bus today that can talk to you more about our campaigns. We have a campaign to address every source of air pollution. We have industry campaigns, we have transportation campaigns, we have backyard polluter campaigns, we have legislative advocacy campaigns, and underpinning all of this, we have campaigns to share information, which is how critical everyone in this room is, and we have campaigns to engage community members as advocates for their health. We study this, they live this, and we want them to be able to advocate for the health of their neighborhoods and their communities, and we have campaigns to do that too.
Houston, a city boasting over 400 chemical and manufacturing facilities, 180 concrete batch plants, and 140 matter recycling facilities, exposes its residents to potentially harmful air pollutants. Compounded by the lack of adequate land use policies, many Houstonians find themselves living, working, and playing in close proximity to these sources of air pollution. The Air Alliance Houston team includes Anthony D'Souza, Juan Flores, Jennifer Hadia, Leticia Gutierrez, and Crystal No. The tour sheds light on the reality of wire gaps in our region's air monitoring network, particularly in relation to industrial and transportation-related air pollution near residential areas. Recognizing these gaps, there is a critical need for a robust community air monitoring network to comprehensively understand communities' exposure to toxic air pollutants on a neighborhood scale. This understanding will pave the way for the development of effective mitigation strategies.
On what air pollution is and how it impacts our health. I wanted to start a little bit by telling you what criteria air pollutants are, because I feel like that's a good place to start from. So back in 1970, there was a federal law that was instituted called the Clean Air Act. And this law was instituted and this law required the US EPA to set standards for certain air pollutants called criteria air pollutants. And these are pollutants that have been studied and found to have health impacts and public health impacts on humans that are exposed to them. So standards have been set, and those standards are called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for these 5 pollutants. There's a 6th one, but I decided to stick with those that are that you can get through air exposure. The 6th one is lead, and lead is through water and paint and all that. So the first one is particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, sulfur oxide, ozone, and carbon monoxide. And there are standards set by the US EPA for these 5 pollutants. Our study focused on 3 of these air pollutants. To move on, sources of air pollution producing, like Jen had already mentioned, range from petrochemical industry and as well as traffic pollution. But for this report, we focused on industrial sources of air pollution. Now, the objective of the study, our report really tried to examine or sought to examine the health impact and related costs associated with particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxide released by 47 of the largest point source industrial facilities in Harris County. And the health outcomes that we looked at were excess mortality and asthma hospitalizations. We utilized air dispersion modeling for this study. We sought to answer the following questions. First of all, what amount of these 3 pollutants do these sources release into the air? Right. Then we looked at the average cumulative concentrations of these pollutants around homes, schools, and sensitive land uses. Then the third step was we looked at excess health impact. Like I mentioned earlier, we looked at asthma, hospitalizations, and excess mortality that are attributable to exposures from this industry. So from now here on, I will just show you a bunch of maps so I can utilize the 5 minutes I probably have left. So like I said, the first step was, we looked at just what the average zip code level concentration for PM 2.5 and for each of the other two pollutants. So as you can see here, the top 2 emitters of PM 2.5 are the ExxonMobil Baytown refinery, olefins plant, and that's in the Baytown area. As you can see, the darker the color in the map, the higher the levels of concentration of PM 2.5. And you can see Deer Park is also darker in color, and that's because the third largest emitter is the Shell Deer Park plant. So you can see that the highest model concentration for PM 2.5 and excess mortality were in zip codes housing the same facilities, Baytown and Deer Park. Moving on, we then overlay, looked at what the excess mortality cases were per zip code, and that were attributable to exposures from those industrial sources. And of course, the same locations, Baytown is the darkest out there, and that shows cumulative all zip codes within our study area recorded approximately 33 additional deaths per year. And these were caused specifically by PM 2.5 emissions from those facilities of concern. Deer Park is also a little bit darker, but Baytown is clearly shown there to have the highest concentration. Now moving on, the second pollutant of concern that we looked at was sulfur dioxide. We also did the same thing. We looked at the annual average zip code level concentration for sulfur dioxide, and Deer Park, Canal View area, Baytown, and I believe there's Cloverleaf, Jacinto City, and a couple of other, Galena Park. You can see the dark part. Yes, Pleasantville, thank you. All showed higher concentrations of sulfur dioxide. Then we estimated the annual excess asthma hospitalizations. We chose these outcomes because studies have clearly shown a correlation between exposures to sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and exacerbation of asthma.
Distinguished speakers on the bus include Juan Flores and Sandy Close, who will distribute informative handouts at the beginning of the tour.
We did the same thing for nitrogen oxide, looked at the annual concentrations by zip code, and you can see Deer Park, Channel View are those that have the highest concentrations from the sources. Then we went on to estimate the excess asthma hospitalizations, and as you can see again, Deer Park, Cloverleaf, Channel View all have those higher, and Sheldon, Sheldon here, all have excess asthma hospitalizations due to emissions.
The tour concludes at 1:30 p.m. at the Air Alliance Houston building on Caroline Street, located in the heart of Houston downtown. By participating in this tour, individuals will gain valuable insights into the intricate dynamics of Houston's air quality challenges and the vital role community awareness plays in fostering positive change. Together, let us strive for a future where clean air is a universal right and no community is left in the shadows of air pollution.
Other potential toxic emissions from the facilities you're going to be in. So we've made some KN95 masks available for you. These will keep much of that pollution out of your lungs and system, and so especially if you are in a sensitive group, if you have a chronic condition, we would recommend you grab one of these, have it with you, so that when you step out of the bus, sometimes it can be so strong you can smell it. And so we wanted to make these available for y'all when you go out there.
That's all for now. Keep watching DTV NN. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment.